to experience being one of the free people who produce their own meat and eggs? PurelyPoultry.com has both the chickens and supplies you need to raise your own poultry.
Would you like pets who produce eggs you can barter with? Your own source of clean meat?
A swan on your pond to make your home strikingly beautiful?
How about some pheasants and quail roaming in your woods for enjoyment? If so, check out PurelyPoultry.com.
Burger House 41 is open at 1860 West Mason in Green Bay. You're invited to indulge in one of life's simplest pleasures, a great burger. We're grilling up 15 fresh signature burgers and have over 30 craft beers for the perfect pairing. Experience Wisconsin's best flavors, including white cheddar cheese curds, a variety of specialty sandwiches, milkshakes, and gourmet frozen custard. Burger House 41 at 1860 West Mason is open at 11 a.m. daily. Taste Wisconsin. Taste amazing.
6%? 7%? That's a lot of money. I might as well just do it myself. Well, that might be true, if a lot of that money you're paying a real estate broker is going toward outdated methods, unnecessary fancy offices, and overpaying executives for a lifetime of service. But you don't need to go that route. Silver Compass Realty is a full-service real estate brokerage serving all of South Central Wisconsin, and the commission is negotiable. Silver Compass will explain exactly what they're going to do to help you buy or sell a home, how that will help you reach your goals, and stand right beside you every step of the way. They want to be your broker, your expert, even when you're not in the middle of a transaction. Silver Compass Realty, helping you find your way home. Contact them today at silvercompassrealty.com or call 608-361-8608. Silver Compass Realty, helping you find your way home. The Free People Show is back. You're listening to episode 18, where Phil Anderson co-hosts with Miles Kristen and our guest, Chris Kressner, a man wearing many hats on this particular show, engineer, Orthodox Christian, and Uber driver, which we're going to cover in this segment now. As I mentioned in the earlier segment, both Chris and I drive for Uber. I haven't in about a month or so. I've been too busy and changed cars. You know, when you change cars, you have to submit your new registration, your new insurance card, and I've been so busy with Palm Sunday, Pascha, moving, the convention. It's just been kind of a pain, but I expect to do that this weekend. You were just driving earlier tonight, weren't you?
Yeah, and actually I'm going back out as soon as we're done here.
See, it's so flexible. You can just decide when you're going to drive, when you're not going to drive. But there are forces that you know, you still have to decide when you're going to drive, not only based on your own schedule, but when it's most profitable. And hopefully trying to find times when it's surging, which isn't all that often in Madison, but when it is surging, that's where the incentive is created for drivers to hit the road. But Miles has something he wants to share about Uber, a question.
Do we want to cover the basics in case people don't know what Uber is?
We'll cover it in our answers. Let's see what Miles has to. What's your?
Oh no, I was just gonna say I have mixed feelings about it because I think we talked about this once actually at the farmers market because there were certain laws that came through on the city government, I want to say, saying no to Uber and Lyft, and then the state government approved it, and then the city kind of had to backtrack.
Yeah.
And I look at areas like, for instance, Door County, where there is no taxi service. So the concept of Uber or Lyft, and I look at it as not just Uber or Lyft, it's more the idea that a private citizen has the right to do that, and that's the more important thing. I mean, there's probably pros and cons with each of the companies, but because I guess in some way I can see how it could negatively affect cab companies that haven't updated to the 21st century,
which is most of them,
which is
not
their
all,
own
but
fault.
Most, yeah,
there's certain cab companies I'll never call because unless it's like, New Year's Eve and I know nobody's going to them. Like I'll be, it's. There's certain cab companies in this town I don't even use because they're so expensive, and I guess it's not the government's place to be protecting cab companies. But back to what I was saying about a place like Door County where there is no cab company, a private citizens being able to drive other citizens around can be great for reducing drunken driving and things like that. So literally Uber and Lyft and things like this can actually be saving lives. So there is a importance to it. I'm just weary, I guess, of a foreign corporation working inside the United States that's potentially economically hurting maybe some taxi businesses.
No, yeah, I understand your concerns. And there's a lot of stuff rolled into there. It's kind of interesting that you mentioned smaller communities because that's the kind of place that Uber and Lyft aren't really there yet. And they've been pretty careful about opening up in certain markets. They started in big ones first, and I don't think they're in Door County. I don't know where else they are in Wisconsin besides Madison and Milwaukee, but and I don't know why they would hold back because it's just software. All they need is a few drivers and a few customers to start up anywhere. So that is definitely a critique of it. And also something, and this is part of my background in transportation, is that in places like Door County and in southwestern Wisconsin, where I ran a transportation program for a couple of years, there already are private citizens giving rides. There are groups that band together and give rides home from the bars in exchange for donations. The government actually interacts with some of them as volunteer drivers and pays them a certain amount per mile to take people to medical appointments, for Medicaid appointments and things like that. So that's sort of already happening. In smaller communities, there's not as much regulation of taxi companies because the taxi companies aren't really there yet. But in bigger communities, you mentioned something that I think is extremely important, critique of the way, I mentioned that Uber has entered markets and Lyft has entered markets by working around the local restrictions, which I have no problem with. But the fact that the state went in and told local municipalities that they could not regulate Uber and Lyft, I have a problem with that.
Yep.
That is, and Scott Walker and the Republicans in Wisconsin have done that on other issues too.
And Corey Mason of the Democrats.
And other people. They basically took, their parties took lobbyist money to write that bill that made Uber, give Uber and Lyft its own category in Wisconsin state statutes. And also as part of that, they made sure it was written in there that it preempted local units of government from legislating against Uber and Lyft. And they've done that with DNR stuff and with mining and other things. And, this idea that the Walker administration and Republicans are somehow small government or local control is baloney, because as soon as there's money in it for them, they're not, So, but what's your experience been with Uber, Chris? What's not only as a libertarian, you participating in it, but your experience with it too?
Sure. Well, before I started actively driving, it was always kind of an intriguing topic to me. Here you have basically an industry that's protected by the government, that namely the taxi cabs. Each city has available a certain number of licenses that. Right, is this how it works?
In Madison, not so much, but in a lot of other cities, they limit.
Like New York, for
exactly,
example, and whatnot.
And Milwaukee, too, which was why taxi service was so bad in Milwaukee.
Right, so they limit supply, and that drives up the prices. So what Uber does is it cuts into that. It's classified as a transportation network company. The rides are arranged beforehand, in the case of Uber and Lyft and other companies, vis-a-vis the software that they have on your smartphone app. And I think here's where the protectionism still stays in place a little bit. We are not allowed to do what's called street hailing,
right? Which
is basically pulling up to a curb, saying, hey, do you need a ride? And get in and I'll take you there. It's got to be all prearranged through the app. And I think that's basically illegal because it's protecting the cab companies. Because if we were able to do that, they wouldn't have a chance at all.
Yeah, I think that there's, even with, Uber and Lyft, we're just going to say Uber because they're the biggest player. I'm not going to, and Lyft is implicit in the group. Uber understand, they're very wise with politics, I think. They went as far as they could, but if they'd really push for street hailing, then they're really overturning the idea that government's got a role in protecting the public from whatever anyway. So, at least with the app, there's some supposed, accountability in terms of who is driving who where, and there being a record of it. I agree with you. If somebody wants to go out and give rides at whatever they want to charge, as long as there's no fraud or coercion involved, I'm totally fine with that. Uber doesn't go that far, obviously, but
right.
I think that they had to take what they could get.
Right, exactly.
So
it's a compromise.
Yeah, their approach is they flood the market with, they let people download the app, they create the demand, then they address the local regulations, but from a position of advantage because people already like it, especially in areas where the taxi industry is terrible and has been for a long time. There's lots of markets like that. So they had, in those situations, they're creating a groundswell of political support to counteract the political support provided by taxi companies and by those politicians who would protect them. So it's very wise, but it only goes so far. So they knew that was probably a battle they weren't going to win because they're arguing that there's accountability and safety by virtue of the app. And that may or may not be true, but it's...
Well, you can at least track somebody down because you've got credit card numbers, and in the case of the drivers have to go through background checks and upload all their vehicle-relevant documents, registration, license.
And here's the thing, too, and I know I ran a couple of different taxi companies in this town, which is, by and large, very, very, very safe. But in situations where somebody would call and say, I had a problem in your cab with the driver. They took me to the wrong place. They overcharged me. They were inappropriate, whatever it might be. And that didn't happen very often, thank God. But it does happen. If that driver just picked up that passenger as a flag, unbeknownst to the dispatcher or the company, and didn't have to document it, then that's less safe than Uber.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's less safe because there's this presumption of safety when somebody pulls up in a cab with markings on it and fares on the side and
alphabet
a
soup.
Yeah, they assume, well, this is fine. I'm covered. I'm fine. But that's not always the case.
Sure.
So there's a lot of
On a side note, I gotta mention there's this guy on State Street who has this. It's not a cab. It's like it's got no sides to it. It's like this long stretch car thing. I don't know if you've seen it, but he figured out how to somehow skirt around the law because he was just doing it as donation. And now he's, if I'm not mistaken, he's getting like large sponsorship from some of the local apartment companies. He's like young guy. I think he's from Morocco or Egypt or something. He's got big frizzy hair, and I was filming...
he had the e-cab for a while.
It's basically the
Amir Morning, that's his name. Yep.
What's his name?
Amir Morning.
Yeah, that guy. I filmed him the other day on State Street. He was outside the Little Wayne show, and I was filming him. I'm like, do you have the greatest job in the world? And he's just like, yes.
Yeah, well, I wish him all the luck in the world. I know he's not making much money at it, but he's trying. And it's an interesting thing because he just goes off of State Street, I don't know, but he's just basically on State Street driving people around, and it's a donation thing. And it's a neat little thing that he's doing. Yeah, I agree. And another case where, excuse me, I think the regulations go too far is there's been occasions in the past where small Spanish-speaking cab companies have cropped up on the south side, on the east side. The city will put their foot down and make them stop. But the taxi companies, try to have people that can speak Spanish available, but they don't always. None of them do always. So if somebody only speaks Spanish, what are they to do if they want taxi? Who are they going to call?
That's where Uber comes in, too, because you don't necessarily have to speak to the driver in order to tell them where you're going. I actually had a Hispanic rider one time who didn't appear to be able to speak English, and I was able to get her to her destination safely and comfortably, and everything worked out just fine.
And I don't think with Uber that's an issue because you can put in your origin, your destination.
Right.
I think it operates in other languages, but at least you can enter the GPS and say, I'm here, and that's not language specific. You can type in the address, and you kind of have to know that, whether you know English or Spanish. It's still going to be the same address. You can get places with Uber and Lyft that you cannot with a regular cab company unless they speak Spanish or whatever language. And actually, there's a lot of people. One of the places where Uber is most popular, and I think you'll attest to this, is on college campuses, and specifically in Eagle Heights, where there's a very diverse population of people from other parts of the world here to study and teach. And they might know, enough English, but they prefer to operate in their native language. And I've been up in Eagle Heights a number of times, pick people up. I say hello, they say hello, and that's all the conversation that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. So we got about a minute till our next break. Is there anything you want to add about Uber,
I
your
never
experiences?
Sorry,
I'm doing a lot of talking.
Question.
Even I'm coughing through my answers, but go ahead.
Uber has been an overwhelmingly positive experience for me as a driver because I meet people from all over the world, from all walks of life, rich, poor, it doesn't matter, educated, non-educated, and by and large, the vast majority are polite, friendly, clean, and they just want to get where they're going, and I just want to take them there, and we have a relatively free market transaction that happens.
Yeah, it's a fabulous service. I'm proud to be associated with it, to be honest with you. So after the break, we'll cover some other topics, including the fact that Chris and I belong to the same church that Justin Amash belongs to. You're listening to The Free People Show at freepeopleshow.com. Back in 2 minutes. 6%? 7%? That's a lot of money.